Good morning, everyone. I'm Jordan Chitley, the editor of the Work-Life section here at the Globe, and also the editor of Globe Drive. I would like to welcome all of you here in the room today and those watching the live stream from across Canada to Attracting Top Talent, Hiring Strategies for Business Growth. I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation. Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we are grateful for the opportunity to gather and learn here today. Over the next couple of hours, we'll dive into strategies to attract top-tier talent and establish your organization as a sought-after employer. We'll hear from talent acquisition experts who will share insights on refining your hiring process, crafting a compelling employer brand, and positioning your company for long-term success. If you're joining us in person today, I would like to invite you to stay for some refreshments and networking after the discussions. I'm pleased to be moderating today's event with April Fong, Deputy Personal Finance Editor here at the Globe. I'd also like to take this moment to thank our presenting sponsor, Indeed Canada, for helping to make today's event possible. We are pleased to have a representative from Indeed joining our program, along with other speakers who share their views independently. Before we get started, I'd like to invite Nikita Gandhi, Human Resources Manager at the Globe, on stage to make a few remarks. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good morning, everyone. As Jordan mentioned, I'm Nikita Gandhi, HR Manager here at the Globe and Mail, and I'm thrilled to kick off today's event. A big part of my role at the Globe is supporting the entire employee lifecycle, from onboarding to performance and ongoing development. And of course, at the heart of that journey is attracting the right talent. I think we can agree that hiring isn't just about filling roles. It's about building the future capability of our organization. Because when you bring in the right people, everything else, culture, productivity, innovation, all has a stronger foundation. I'd like to share a quick story. A few years ago, we were hiring for a highly specialized role on our data science team, a role that required not just technical expertise, but also a deep understanding of our values and mission. We had a strong candidate on paper, but what really stood out was how they connected with our purpose during the interview. They spoke about how the Globe's commitment to trusted journalism aligned with their own values, and that alignment made all the difference. Not only did they accept our offer, but they've since become a key contributor and a strong leader within the organization. And that experience reminded me that attracting top talent isn't just about skills, it's about connection. It's about telling a compelling story of who we are as employers and why someone should choose to grow their career with us. I think it's also important to note that employers and talent acquisition professionals are facing a unique set of challenges today. A shrinking labor pool due to demographic shifts in an aging population, rising expectations from candidates who are looking for flexibility, purpose, and a strong employer brand, fierce competition for in-demand skills, especially in high-growth sectors, and of course, the growing influence of AI and automation, which is transforming not only the types of skills we're hiring for, but also how we source, assess, and engage with talent. These shifts are pushing us to think differently. We need to be more strategic, proactive, and innovative in how we attract and retain top talent. And that's exactly what today is all about. We will hear from industry leaders on how to position your organization as an employer of choice, how to navigate the opportunities and the risks of AI in hiring, and how to prepare for the future of work by anticipating the skills that your business will need next. Whether you're here to learn, share, or connect, I encourage you to engage fully and take away ideas that you can put into action. Together, we can shape a more future-ready workforce. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikita, and thanks for always answering my HR questions. We'll begin today, so please join me in welcoming two fantastic speakers that we have now. Brendan Bernard, Senior Economist at Indeed Canada. And Natalia Demberg, Head of Talent Acquisition and Enablement at BMO. You guys both have some fans in the room. All right, let's just begin by having you guys both tell us a bit about what you do. Natalia, do you want to start?
Yeah, I lead talent acquisition and enablement at BMO, as you mentioned. We hire about 14,000 people a year, about half of those externally. I spent most of my career at BMO, 15 years, but this is actually my first HR job. I've been in role for just under a year.
And Brendan?
So my name is Brendan Bernard, and I'm senior economist at Indeed Canada. And my job at Indeed, so Indeed is the world's largest hiring platform. You can imagine we collect just more data than any one person could filter and digest. But my job is to kind of like distill what we see happening on our platform and combine that with the wealth of information from public sources like Statistics Canada to make sense of what's going on in the Canadian labor market and share those findings in forums like this.
Thanks both for being here. Brendan, we go to you a lot for work-life story, so I also need to thank you publicly for that. All right, when it comes to the labor market, a lot has changed in the last 5 years. We saw employment spike, and then we saw the rare job seekers or workers market. When it seemed like things were leveling off, our biggest ally started a trade war with us and most of the rest of the world, causing businesses to pull their forecasts. That is a high-level picture, but it all trickles down to workers and the trends we see. So I'm just going to go through a list of some of the trends that we have seen in the last few years. Let's see. We have the Great Resignation, revenge quitting, quiet firing, quiet hiring, bare minimum Mondays, career cushioning, the Great Reshuffle, the Great Stay, the Great Realization, and return to office. And I should probably add to that hybrid work. Did I miss anything?
I think if I were to throw another one on there and to build on that theme of purpose, like purpose, company culture, values continue to be, especially for younger workers, key drivers of what makes them choose and stay with an employer. Mercer just published their global trend report, and that's the number one reason that there's the people that they surveyed, 14,000 executives and HR leaders say that what makes people thrive at work, and it was number 9 last year. So I think that speaks to obviously the external, very fluid environment we're in, but also to the list that you've just went through and the kind of the turbulence that the workforce has been through, and where people looking for safety, but also to be connected to something bigger.
I will say I'm quoted in a Globe article extensively about how the Great Resignation didn't really happen in Canada.
Oh, okay.
But
we just talked about it.
I know.
Maybe it was just a blip.
Yeah, but I would just add one thing about what's happened more recently, because a lot of those trends you discussed, they were really built up during a just totally unprecedented time for the labor market, both during the kind of crash during the pandemic, but also the rebound after. I'd say more recently, what stands out to me, I don't have like a catchy word for it, but like a 2-track labor market, where Canadians who are comfortably employed have been doing pretty well over the past few years. Job security has been pretty strong. People are generally getting the hours they're looking for. We don't have like part-time people really looking for full-time jobs. So on that side of the job market, things have been pretty solid. But where things have gotten weaker noticeably is just for job seekers across a whole different range of circumstances. You've got youth struggling to land that first job. You have people who've lost their jobs, taking longer to find new work, and even just job hopping has slowed down a lot. And so for those kind of in jobs that they're pleased with, they're doing pretty well, but job seekers are having a tougher time today.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring us up to today. So unemployment is at 7%, the highest since 2021 and the highest since 2016, not including a pandemic year. And youth unemployment is also really high. Yet so many surveys of business leaders that we even write about in the Globe, they say their biggest concern is finding talent, even though there's like all those people out there looking for work. So is this in line with what you were saying? And my big question is like, how can both be true? Brendan, do you want to start?
So when I think about the unemployment rate and how that, and just like the state of the labor market and how this matches up with just the constant concern about, employers finding and retaining like the top people, the right people that they need for their organizational success. I see sort of the unemployment rate kind of more in line with questions of, is labor the key constraint on your business today? And for those types of survey questions, the Bank of Canada asks a question like that, the responses are down. It's like 20% of businesses these days. That's well below what it was when the unemployment rate was lower. And we sort of see a similar thing on Indeed. Job postings soared coming out of the pandemic. They're kind of back to normal now. But for any business, now maybe AI will change that, but these days, talent in employees are the foundation of any business. And when we're talking about like key roles that really are going to drive organizational success, those demand for those roles, it's not necessarily going to be cyclically sensitive, and the ability to find those workers isn't necessarily going to be sort of fluctuating up and down with the unemployment rate. You're looking for sort of unique individuals who possess like multiple skills for really complex roles, and that's going to sometimes look different than sort of demand overall in the economy.
Natalia?
Yeah, I mean, I guess along those lines, right? Like when I think about our organization at BMO, when it comes to our high volume entry level roles in the branches and the call center, like we don't have a talent attraction issue, right? Like the pool is really diverse and large, and so it's really about getting the right people, because to your point, like 40% attrition rate in those types of roles, and so it's really expensive to churn through that talent. And then on the professional side, we are struggling finding the right skills at a cost we can afford, and so non-traditional sources of talent become increasingly important. Like our sourcing game becomes increasingly important, and then students has been for BMO a really key way in which we kind of grow that from within. And so we hire about 1,000 students a year. We put them through extensive training, but also experience programs where they get to really learn the company. And then we've seen some really strong conversion rates out of that. And so that's just one of the ways that we're kind of looking at it.
So as a way to sort of think about the 7% versus business leaders having trouble finding talent, is it a skill, like does it come down to a skills mismatch?
Absolutely. Like skills, it's really at the heart of it. I think we've all been quoting the stats from World Economic Forum from 2017. The half-life of skills is 5 years. I was at an event just last week hosted by Phenom, and their CEO was saying that for AI skills, it's 6 months now. That same Mercer survey, the number one risk that business leaders are seeing to business growth and is upskilling and reskilling employees at a fast enough rate. So that's like together is certainly the burning platforms, a platform for organizations to think about putting skills at the heart of their talent ecosystem and designing workforce planning and workforce management around that, so that we make really smart investment choices about where do we grow skills from within, where do we go out to market to acquire, where do we outsource, or where do we use bots.
So is more of it going to be on the employer going forward? Like, are we, like we always hear managers say, like, I want a candidate who can hit the ground running, but are we moving to a time when, like, just more of these skills, they're going to have to be trained for, like, in the company? Brendan, you want to start?
So everything costs, right? If you're looking for someone who is ready with checks every box and is ready to hit the ground running, that candidate might not be just ready to walk in the door, especially depending on what you're offering. And so that's the first question. There might be talent
and by
out
offering,
there.
you mean like money?
We're talking pay. What job seekers are looking for. It's not a mystery, but we actually do run surveys at Indeed asking this specifically. People who are currently working, what they're looking for, but who are actively looking, what they're looking for in a new job. Higher pay always tops the list. But what makes a job a good job reflects a whole different set of factors, from benefits and career growth opportunities to company culture and flexibility. That's all part of the compensation package, kind of thinking holistically. And so that's the first kind of question that I think people need to think about when finding that sort of like unicorn candidate. is difficulty. Am I competitive? Am I what we're offering? Is it enough to get this person in the door? But at the same time, companies have limited flexibility, especially on the pay side, but also other job attributes as well. And so from there, if those constraints are binding, then it's important to start thinking outside the box, expanding the candidate pool, and then looking at folks with maybe soft skills or other sort of with the foundation that with a bit of training, they can be an excellent employee. But there's never going to be a silver bullet to solution, because when someone is in strong demand, that's going to show up in their job market prospects.
Natalia, what are you seeing at BMO? Is there some of this okay, we can't get the exact right candidate, but this person has a lot of the skills we're looking for. Maybe we can train them to be in this spot in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And our entry level customer service representative roles in the branch are a good example of that, where we're competing for talent with retail, with food and service. And so we're going to be investing in training those people up. And the goal is that they're not the 40% who are tried, and they actually stay in the organization and become future bankers at BMO. And so it's looking for those softer attributes, like what's important for that job: customer centricity, empathy, advisory, and kind of really screening for that. And then also thinking about the future and recognizing that the skills are going to change, the people will be the same. And so hiring for things like learning agility, resiliency, comfort with ambiguity, the ability to work in kind of matrixed horizontal ways across the organization. And then, invest in learning and development. And a lot of firms increasingly do a lot of that. At BMO, we spend over $85 million last year on learning and development.
We ran a story recently, and it was on what you should be looking for when hiring a candidate. And I think the number one thing is some version of the ability to adapt to change, because everything is changing so quickly. So your ability to learn on your feet, basically. Brendan, what are you seeing as far as these skills that people are going to need, or that hiring managers should probably be looking for, to have the candidate that they're going to need in the future?
This is a good question, and to be honest, it's going to vary so much from job to job. But thinking of kind of where things are going, I sort of see the world of AI kind of just setting the landscape where now we kind of have an idea of the types of capabilities that AI is developing and where those are heading. And so thinking about where candidates complement those changes, I think is one area where we're starting to already see now employers increasingly mention AI in their job postings, even outside the tech sector. It's still relatively rare, but we've gone from less than 1.5% of job postings mentioning some form of AI to now 2.5%, and this is and over a relatively short period of time. And I think this is kind of an area where sort of thinking ahead on what specifically a role is involved with, and how the skills, what type of skills sort of complement the new technology that's coming down the line.
All right, I want to switch from skills to the demographic divide. And we all know there's an aging workforce. Natalia, I'll start with you, but how concerned should companies be about this aging workforce?
Well, it's more than just the aging of the workforce. For the first time, we have 6 generations in the workforce working alongside each other. And so, yes, thinking about the value proposition for that demographic and ways to make sure that there's knowledge transfer and that they're there to kind of coach the upcoming employees, but also equipping managers and leaders with tools to navigate a multi-generational workforce environment where the needs and the priorities for each of those demographics around things like flexibility, career growth, work-life balance, authority are very, very different.
Are you working at BMO to ensure some sort of institutional knowledge transfer from a lot of the people who are going to be retiring down to the younger generations?
We're certainly looking at that in the context of our succession planning, but I don't know if any organization has really cracked the code on an institutionalized approach to knowledge transfer from an aging workforce. That'd be a cool project.
Brendan, do you see this aging workforce? Like, do you think it will lead to a tighter labor market and possibly wage inflation?
So I see demographic change kind of like a trend, like a sort of a radiator humming in the background. When it comes to like the tightness of the labor market, the unemployment rate, things like that, at the end of the day, the economic cycle is going to be the driver of that. But in the background, I wouldn't be surprised to see sort of slower labor force growth at a time when the population is still growing, so aging rather than declining population, but slower labor force growth. Sort of result in a tighter labor market. And we've seen this even in some parts of Canada. I think this could be one reason, for instance, the labor market in Quebec has changed over the past decade or so, where Quebec has been aging a bit faster than Canada overall. And we've seen the Quebec unemployment rate come down faster than what's happened in the rest of the country. When it comes to wages, though, I think at the end of the day, wage growth, it just depends how much activity is happening in the economy. If there's money to go around, then that's going to flow through to wages. But at the end of the day, how strong the economy is, that's going to be the ultimate driver of whether people are seeing wage gains.
Does immigration have a role to play?
Well, so one interesting thing about the sort of demographic trends in Canada recently is that the aging population has almost been put on pause in recent years. Kind of like over the decade from like 2010 to 2019, we did have a rapidly aging population, yet at the same time, we were the labor market was able to adjust to it in part because people were working longer. In particular, there were a lot of people still going back to like 2020 to 2010 who by like age 60 were starting to leave the labor force. And we've seen that kind of like push out now where more and more people are working to 65. It drops off sharply then, but that sort of like push of people working into their 60s, that definitely sort of helped offset that aging population. And then more recently, we saw Canada's surge in population growth, which totally paused aging for the time being. Now, both of those trends, the sort of retirement age looks like it's plateaued, and immigration is set to slow. We're going to see a dramatically slower growth in the Canadian labor force going forward, and in businesses especially where the workforce is a bit older, it's going to be a major change to the hiring situation.
So, given all of what we've talked about, if leaders are looking to hire today, like what do they need to know about the current economic situation?
So one thing I'll just like reiterate again on AI, that like we're still in the early moments, but this is a general question, and AI is a general purpose technology. And so thinking about kind of like where jobs fit in with the rapid development of this technology, I think that's job number one. I think another thing which I don't need necessarily to tell employers, but I've just been struck that in this current uncertain economic environment, Canadian employers are still looking to hire. We see job postings on Indeed. They've been quite flat this year. Now they're down from where they were during the post-pandemic boom, but people haven't paused their recruiting activity. And I think that highlights how people are sort of like, do see at least some light at the end of the tunnel in this current situation that I think for employers thinking about recruiting, knowing what their competition is doing is pretty important.
Yeah, I think it's important to have kind of like an eye to the future and an ear to the ground at the same time, where we just talked about those softer skills that are going to really enable people thrive in the future as AI really comes into play, but also in the moment, the market and the expectations. And so if you're a hiring manager for an AI professional, like you might get 80% of what you're looking for, or have to pay more, or be comfortable with more flexibility. And so at the end of the day, hiring people that will fit into your company culture and that will have that learning agility to thrive as all of these things are happening is going to be the right call.
Natalia, I want to give the last word to you, but how should companies position their brand to best attract workers? I feel like this is something you think about a lot.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, just like with any company and any product, like the brand is really there to bring the product and the experience to life. And so if that sucks, the brand is not going to be helpful. And so in an employment context, obviously that's the value proposition, and having a value proposition that resonates with what people are looking for, having points of differentiation and really leaning into those in the way the brand comes to life with, you know, storytelling, and that needs to reflect the lived experience of the people in the company, and so that authenticity is kind of what unlocks, in my view, a great employer brand.
That was really interesting. Thank you very much, Brendan, Natalia. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. What a fascinating panel discussion. My name is April Fong. I'm Deputy Personal Finance Editor of the Globe and Mail, and I'm delighted to help facilitate the next panel discussion. We're going to build on that fantastic first panel on talent insights for business leaders and dig a little bit deeper on how you can compete for talent and be an employer of choice. We have some great experts ready to tackle this discussion and share insights on the topic. Joining us is Candice Maxis, Chief People and Culture Officer at the Canadian Olympic Committee. I'm also delighted to introduce Scott Sheeman, Professor of Sociology and Canada Research Chair at the University of Toronto. And last, but certainly not least, from Nokia, we have Global Head of Talent Acquisition for Corporate Functions, Strategy, and Technology, Linda Krebs. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm sure this will be a fantastic discussion. We're talking about the employer of choice. That can mean so many different things to so many different people. I thought we'd start there and get your insights on what that means to each of you. Linda, how would you describe what employer of choice means?
It's an interesting topic because it means quite several things, but it's really about employee-led, what they feel, if they feel purpose, if they feel that there is psychological safety in their environment. And it's really about their employees and how they feel working in the workplace. And that's really what employer of choice is. It's not a billboard that says, come work for us. It's really about the employees speaking on behalf of their experience in the workforce, right? So that's overall, that's what it means for me.
Candice, what's your take on that?
I would absolutely agree with what she just said. When you look at the workforce of today, they're looking more and more for a reason, purpose, and you just mentioned that. So particularly in the context of the Canadian Olympic Committee, this is what we offer. We offer a great mission, and people believe and support that mission, and I think this is probably one of the items. But for those who maybe have a mission that is not as attached to a greater purpose, sometimes it could be other things like is it the culture, the environment that you are actually offering, or is it just simply what you promise as an experience within the organization and how it's connected to their personal values? That could be another way to look at, to be coming across as an employer of choice.
Mission, personal values, there's so many different things to calculate that formula. Scott, you study job quality, and the question of what is work for is part of your work. How has the term employee of choice evolved for employees? What might it have meant in, say, 2010 compared to what it is now?
So, yeah, I'm a sociologist at the University of Toronto, and for 2 decades, I've been studying what people think and feel about work, what they do, but in particular how they talk about work. And essentially writing a book right now titled I Want More Money, which is the big one, meaning, and then our quest to make a decent living. And it's going to be coming out in a year, but I'm thinking about adding in an age where jobs might be replaced. And so actually that's what inspires my work, is what happens when work disappears. And I started studying this in 2020 when on March 13th, Friday the 13th, people were temporarily laid off by the millions, and then we're in a holding pattern. And I was really looking at what people missed most. So one of the questions that I ask, and one of the things that maybe gets at what people would choose, is what would they miss most if work were suddenly to disappear? It's a powerful question, and wow, when you ask that across the age span, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I've talked to people in their 80s, those are fascinating answers. So they reveal what would attract somebody to a job. The second thing I ask is what's something that you got a little more of that made a big difference? And most people say money, and even more so it's top of mind because of cost of living. But the second thing is recognition, and we can talk a little bit about that. It comes in all different forms. The third question that you really can get a reading on how to attract and retain is I ask people looking back, especially people who retired, what are the top things that impacted your job satisfaction throughout your career? And I bet you can guess the number one thing, with a negative thing, a bad boss. It's the number one answer. And so, yeah, so this has been my passion for 2 decades, really, just really trying to get at why would you choose a job? Why would you stay in a job? And what makes work human? And now with AI and all of the stories, that's going to become a big question. What can machines do? But what do we need to do as humans?
There was a whole movie on horrible bosses. So, Linda, you looked like you wanted to jump in.
I watched.
That's true. That's a good movie. But I was just going to say, to Scott's point there, like really, it's also too with impacts, right? Like, if you don't have a purpose or a mission, and if say your job disappears in one day, you don't necessarily. Everybody in the world gets up, or maybe not everybody, but a lot of people in the world get up and they go to work. Right? And so when we talk about impacts, what are you getting up every single day for, right? To make money, but also to actually add value and leave a legacy behind. For a lot of people, it's about legacy and what they can do in terms of impacts, right? So
that structured motivation is a huge factor that we kind of take for granted, but it's remarkable how many people say that matters. Structured, a reason to get out of the house is a shocking answer. For me, at least, I was surprised to hear that.
Yeah. I think that, and the way that you framed it, that powerful question of what are we going to miss most about work is a guiding light, right? But money is a big thing. And so let's talk about competitive pay. Candace, there's been some power swings. Jordan mentioned many of the great things that have happened in recruiting and the labor market over the last few years. A hiring boom that also had quiet quitting and maybe some salary increases as a result of that. Now we're seeing layoffs and companies trying to tamp down on costs. You've worked at some big corporations like Deloitte and Coca-Cola, and you're now at the Canadian Olympic Committee, which is a nonprofit. Whether you're a big or small firm, how should leaders be thinking about how to make pay competitive?
There's clearly, I would say, foundational actions that you have to do to make sure you're competitive, your pay is competitive. One of them, which is obvious, is always to stay abreast of what's happening in the market. Has it evolved depending of certain expertise? We spoke about AI or technology earlier. Did that evolve? Is it more of a is the demand changing, which will influence, obviously, how we pay for some roles. Now, having said that, it is important. I recognize it is important, but I think in my 20 years of experience in people and culture, I know for a fact that It is important, but it's not necessarily the end-all and be-all. Every time I would have exit interviews or have conversations with people that are leaving, sometimes they'll have a conversation about, I got this great offer, and I'm considering it. And then I always take a moment to ask, what if I can match exactly what you got?
Right.
Will it change your decision? And it's not always yes. So I think from that you can see that pay is important. Everybody has financial obligations, but there are oftentimes other items that counts for in every individual. It is different from a person to another, obviously, but I'm telling you, with that, those exchanges that I have with employees every time, I always start with that. Even in my team, when people come and make the sad decision to leave, people will eventually leave. I always ask this question: if I can match exactly what you got and give you 10% more, does that make a difference? Will you take a minute to think about it, or do you already have a foot out the door? And you would be surprised to see how many times actually the answer is no, it won't make a difference.
That's a really interesting insight from an exit interview question. Linda, what's your take on that? Is money everything?
To some people, yes. But for others, I would say no. And there's also generational differences as well. So if we're looking at maybe some of the early careers generation, money is not, yes, it is important because they are starting out their career, but it's not necessarily everything. It could be, whether or not the company values sustainability, whether or not there's inclusion and diversity, and whether there's professional growth in the company. And so I've seen many times where individuals will select job opportunities based on those values versus just money alone. Because that's truly important, right? And so we can't necessarily always compete against some of these other companies that pay an absorbent amount more than the market, for example. And so companies have to reflect on what other offerings do they have in the organization, whether it's professional development, whether it's culture, whether it's amazing bosses, for example, and things like that, they really have to focus on versus just money itself. And so, yes, okay, it is important for a lot of individuals, and it's the top indicator, and people will say that. But when it comes down to the actual core of what people are looking for, they're looking for so much more than that, right? And so employers have to really sort of change their mindset to say, okay, back in the day, it was always like, what do you want to do for us? But really right now, it's employers have to say, okay, this is why you want to work for us. These are the reasons why you as a potential candidate want to work for Nokia, for example. And they'll list all these things that will help and align with their values. That's what an interview is for.
Scott, I think this is probably a good time for you to weigh in because, as you noted earlier, the affordability crisis has made the calculation of what makes competitive pay competitive really complicated. So can you talk a little bit about that impact?
Yeah, we could have a whole day on money. So I also have been tracking, so I track the quality of working life, but I track the quality of economic life too for the past 20 years. In Canada and the US, I'm a dual citizen, so I have my feet in both places. And the thing that really stands out, and the reason why I wrote the book, is that I've seen a shocking trend across age. So again, I think the generational question is an interesting one. I think maybe it's overblown on some things, but there's been a shocking trend in this kind of reductive mindset that a job is just a way of earning money, nothing more. So I tell my friends this, and nobody believes, like, oh, people don't really believe that. But I've done qualitative research to really press it. And the reason why is because money has just become more top of mind. If you track the way people perceive cost of living, even just since 2020, it's eye-popping. It's eye-popping. Again, for a sociologist who's really nerdy in the data, I've rarely seen something jump so dramatically. And you can see the political consequences of it. People can't afford things. So money becomes more prevalent in people's minds. Here's the problem, though, and the reason why I'm writing the book is the risk is when you focus on the money factor, and money means a lot of things. It can mean recognition, actually. So it can mean, like, what can I buy? Can I buy a house? It can also mean, why am I underpaid? Why am I doing 3 jobs and getting paid for 1? And so money is a loaded topic. People want it, they want more of it, but they definitely want more beyond that. The problem is the narrative has become more impoverished around it, I think, the way we talk about it, because of the money factor. I can say more if you want, but I'll...
I think that's a good start. Candace, how have you noticed that insight from Scott that, you know, there are more conversations around money in a sort of impoverished way?
I'm pretty sure that if you would ask talent acquisition professionals in this room or virtual room how they would have seen this surface, it's certainly at the time they make offers. I think if you think about maybe 10 years ago, people were excited and would just accept offers on the first offer. Now, the amount of counter or declines of offers have significantly increased. I can't give you a number, but I'm pretty sure talent acquisition professionals would agree to that. So people negotiate more. Women negotiate more, which I'm happy about. We know that there has been some inequalities around that, but it still showcases how even when it comes to annual cycles, some organizations do salary increases on an annual basis, and you know, typically a couple years ago, you would say, here's your salary increase, you know, thank you for your great year, good job, and so on. Now you see more of, thank you, but I was expecting more, and here's why. And you know, I would like you to reconsider the salary increase you gave me, and so on. So I would say that's certainly one factor. Linda, I don't know if you've experienced that, but for sure, this is one strong aspects where I saw it firsthand.
What are your tips on addressing that, you know, increase back and forth on negotiating? Linda, can you weigh in on that?
Well, there's a couple of things I would say. One is actually listening to your employees and finding out really their core in terms of what they're looking for. Sometimes the root of it is not always, I mean, as an organization based on economies and all that kind of stuff, we don't necessarily always have the budget to provide those higher salaries or, you know, increases, right? And so there could be other offerings that we could identify with our employees, for example, right? And so there could be, you know, different professional development, you know, opportunities. There could be different work-life balances, different things of that nature. And so really, I think listening to your employees, you know, empathizing with them, and then adapting, you know, that way, right? And so that's, I mean, sometimes we're bound really by the budget that we have and the economy. And so really when it comes down to it is there's other things that kind of can actually, you know, be beneficial for them. And it hasn't necessarily been an issue right at the get-go. And then eventually I think, you know, you have to actually follow through on those aspects as well. That's the biggest thing, right? So. And
if I may, I think there's other aspects that are important to bring to the conversation, like the non-monetary, you know, I'm going to call them perks that employees are getting that actually is could be translating into money. For example, for us at the Canadian Olympic Committee, we have a hybrid model where people are asked to come to the office 3 days. You know, hearing that some organization is shifting to 4 made me look great now. But, you know, I think knowing that for some people, having the flexibility and less commute depending on where they live, these, you know, it's costs that can add up on the long run. So sometimes just giving to people the sense of, yes, you have your base pay and your bonus, but here are all the other things that we offer you as part of your employee experience that actually maybe remove or take away some of the burden that you would have at home. I do think it makes a difference.
So looking at the entire package is very important. On that topic, I want to turn the discussion to employer value proposition and what leaders should be thinking in that sense. How do you come up, we heard in the earlier panel about how this is the first time where there's 6 generations in a workforce, which is very challenging. How do you come up with a value proposition as an employer if you're trying to attract and retain 6 generations of employees? Linda, maybe we'll start with you.
Listen. You listen to your employees. You have feedback loops. You have focus groups. I think EVP, to create an EVP, there's so many different aspects to that, because we have, like, for example, for us at Nokia, we have 75,000 employees, 130 different countries. Everybody's values are different, and cultural differences are very different, and then the generational differences to get into that, right? And so I think overall we have to listen to our employees in terms of what they're looking for and align that globally, right? But then what I do is I empower each and every single business group and every single hiring manager when they are recruiting to have a value proposition as well, so that they are attracting those individuals for specific reasons when they're coming in. So when we talk about impact and looping that back into the impacts, we have an overall Nokia value proposition in terms of what we can offer as a company, our culture, but then I empower our hiring managers and our talent acquisition partners to every time they're recruiting for one specific requisition or job opportunity is to ask the question, what is a value proposition for a candidate coming into your particular team? What kind of impacts, that they're going to be making, right? And so it has to lead with authenticity. That's the number one thing, right? Is that, you can say things, but let's say, for example, you're, big on diversity and your board of directors is not necessarily gender diverse. That's, kind of conflicting in terms of that value proposition, right? And so when I say authenticity, I say you have to actually make sure and double check that, what you're actually saying, you could see within the organization visibly, because I'll tell you, and I don't want to get into the generational things, people will see that. And, this next generation, for example, will absolutely look at that. And if they don't see that, they're not going to be interested in your organization whatsoever.
Candice, what are some key generational differences you see when it comes to, making sure that you communicate your employer value proposition?
I would say, I think the word that comes to mind when you ask this question is the notion of managing expectations, right? The expectations will feel different, from an audience to another, depending of the generational differences. I have the pleasure to serve in an organization where the crowd, the staff workforce is relatively young. What comes with that sometimes is, the need to very oftentimes, explain the why in every single step that we're making. But it also brings back the importance of making sure that your employee value proposition is clear, and that it people are clear on, when you join our organization, this is what you get to experience. Because sometimes there may be a disconnect between what your brand transpires and what is the actual experience within the organization. And depending of certain generations, some will come, because they like your brand. Some come because they think the experience will be a certain way. I can share very briefly the example. Like, I think sometimes people join our organization thinking, wow, this is great. Like, I'm going to go to the Olympics and then, have all these TikTok ready moments and so on. When in reality, they get there, they have a super rewarding experience, but it's a really tough job when, the time comes to serve our Olympians and so on. So it's really important to make sure that as people have access to those opportunities, they understand this is what you're signing up for. It's going to be a great experience, but this is also what it means. And then you get to decide if this is for you or if this is not. But again, depending of your audience and the different generations, it could mean certain things to one or to another.
So what I'm hearing is if I join the Canadian Olympic Committee, I shouldn't expect to just chill and watch the 100-meter final?
You will watch the 100-meter final, but it may be in Canada, it may be in a host country, it may be in different ways, but you will have certainly a very rewarding experience.
But I think your message, jokes aside, is that it's important to set the expectations for retention purposes.
100%.
Scott, you've talked about how meaning for employees is really important but squishy. And that human relating is really important to that. And you've also pointed out that AI is going to be a big disruptor in labor. If we're going to have more AI, maybe less humans, what kind of challenges do you think that's going to bring to that human relating aspect of meaning? Big question.
Yes. I've got to get this book out quickly.
Yeah.
So as an academic, I mean, a couple of things here. Like, I keep hearing the phrase human work, and it just strikes, as opposed to what? Like, as opposed to what? Like, what are we going to do? And the answer is usually universal basic income. But the people in my research say money's not enough. I mean, we have a that's a whole panel, another panel. The values question, in my listening to people for decades now, I think employers should be careful about assuming that people know what they value. I've heard a lot of conflict in people's values. In fact, think about it. What do you value? I mean, you could value the environment, and you could be working at a company that is like, and you compromise those values. Also, as a sociologist, I would not forgive myself if I didn't use the term socialization, awful term. But it's true, at work, especially younger workers, look at work as a place for socialization. And that means learning what people value. I became chair of my department for 6 years, and that was the worst thing I've ever did. Nobody socialized me to be a leader. I sit and write my books, but suddenly I'm dealing with people, and wow, I learned what I value, what other people value on the job, on the fly. And in fact, that will probably stick with me more than anything I ever read or wrote. What was your other question? But so I think one of the things that we can do is recognize, and younger people, I think, again, the generational thing, I think we need to be careful about overstating, and there's a whole movement in sociology to get rid of the term Generation X, the truth is we're human, most people have needs. You see patterns where, for example, in the data that I see, younger people don't want to work independently as much as we think they do. And that's a powerful thing, because if you say, well, stay at home and work, and you have that autonomy and flexibility, and we throw that around, and I'm not going to deny it's a good thing, but not everybody needs or prefers that, and I think that's something to be mindful of. Younger people need that socialization, and that's one of the powerful things that work is for. And frankly, when you ask people what they miss most, I mean, I did a word cloud of this where you can take tens of thousands of data points and just shove it in AI and it'll give it to you. But money is the biggest word, and the next biggest word has something to do with the people. The people. And if you remove that from the equation, not everybody loves people, but some aspect of the people really, really makes a difference for people.
It depends on the people, right?
To be honest, all of this depends. I mean, there's no one size fits all for anything. So all of this depends. But I think if there's one through line, it's more of like, what's the most prevalent thing that comes out of the data? Money, people, and then the other big thing that's kind of the hidden one, maybe not so hidden, is that capacity to develop your own special skills and abilities. That really, really comes out as socializing the self in a way.
It's not to do with AI, but the values aspect ties into a lot with like the monetary aspect as well. And so I always use this like analogy is the rocking chair mentality, right? Is that when you're 90 years old and you're sitting on a rocking chair on the porch and you reflect back on your career or your just personal life, is that what is it? You feel fulfilled, right? And maybe that can align with some of the other aspects, the human aspects, the monetary aspects, things of that that nature, and in terms of value. So it's not to do with AI, but I just wanted to put a plug in there from that perspective.
Yeah, you're finding out,
Yes.
to kind of tie those things together. You're kind of figuring out what your superpower is, why you love work, right?
Yeah.
We've heard a lot too about how DEI efforts, a company having that as part of their own values is really important for many job candidates. In the US, these efforts are under threat, even being attacked. Kenneth, I was wondering if you could talk about to what extent are Canadian employees prioritizing DEI when choosing where they want to work?
I mean, I can speak from my own experience. I would say it is very still actual. We, at the Canadian Olympic Committee, just recently finalized our DEI action plan, strategic plan, sorry. And there was a point in time with everything going on, the geopolitical context, where we had to ask ourselves, okay, this is happening over there. Are we changing the way we stay the course? Are we changing what we are doing? Or do we feel it's still important, and so on? And then the answer when I had my exchange with the CEO was, given who we are and the mission of our organization, we are staying the course and we are reaffirming our commitment. I would even share that through some of our talent acquisition process. These are very clear questions that candidate ask. You know, I went on your website, scanned your website to find for information. I couldn't find it. Can you tell me more about XYZ and so on, related to inclusion and so on? So people are, especially when we talk about attracting top talent, it is still very top of mind for Canadian job seekers, and trying to understand what are you about, what do you value, so that they can determine is it for them or remember we spoke about the notion of how people's personal values are tied to the organization and how is it a match or is it not? That also is taken into account. So I've seen it certainly as we have conversation with potential candidate where before, maybe this question wasn't so much asked in, like, let's say the top 5-6 questions they would ask. Now it is very prominent.
Another question, of course, that I'm sure lots of job candidates are asking during interviews is, where do you want me to work? The Globe and Mail broke, I'll just give a shout out to my employer, but the Globe broke a story recently on how RBC is ordering employees back to the office 4 days a week, and Scotia followed suit. And at one point early in the pandemic, it seemed like maybe some of us may never go back to the office. Linda, can you talk a little bit about how that has changed and how Nokia has approached this, this hard question of where should people work?
So this is it was at one point a lot more of a hot topic than AI, funny enough. We're a little bit of a unique organization because, again, we have 130 different offices across the globe. And prior to the pandemic, there was already individuals who were working remotely. So I think, and our head office in Canada is actually in Ottawa, which we follow suit a lot in terms of government and some of the, return or mandates back to work, or back to the office, that is. And so for us, we have to, from a talent attraction standpoint, think about long-term and what effects that is if we mandate individuals back to the office. So we're still hybrid. We haven't necessarily globally mandated individuals back to the office because we have 75,000 people. There are certain teams that have requested individuals to go back to the office on a hybrid level. But the one thing that we've empowered our managers of those particular teams who have required our employees to go back in a hybrid manner is the work-life balance and the flexibility, and stressing the importance of that. But not only that, but the bigger aspect is the impacts of, like, the purpose of why you're mandating your employees to go back or requesting your employees going back to the office is that if you're going to send them back with purpose. Send them back with a reason, to come to the office, so that they feel like that they're missing out on something. But, if they don't come to the office, and if they are coming to the office, make it so that it's engaging, and so that way that they do get something out of it, not necessarily just a mandate, right? And so that's the difference for us globally. But we haven't, in a lot of different organizations, haven't mandated, everybody has to go back to work and everybody has to go back, 3 or 4 days a week. There has been people that are hardware teams that have never left. I mean, they're essential workers, so they were always in the office no matter what. We have employees who don't even live close to the office. They live in a different province or state or country, and they work in a different, out of a different office. And so it's been an interesting journey, but right now there hasn't been mandates except for specific teams. But if they did request it, purpose, intention,
Purpose-driven.
reasons, absolutely, 100%. Not just the free lunches or the free pizzas. We all love that too. And actually, food is a big motivator. It is. I won't lie for our people, but essentially it's not just that, right? So, yeah.
Purpose-driven work arrangements. Scott, you look like you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, when that term essential worker came out back in 2020, I just was like, this is going to come back. I mean, again, talk about a powerful statement, like what's an essential worker? I'll just chime in here on this point. In studying what work is for, one of the questions I've also asked is, what is the office for? And the reason why I asked that question is because I was in the field with people who were full-time at an office, and then the pandemic hit, and then overnight, they were all Zooming and teaming and all of that, like the rapid adjustment. And it really became clear that this was going to be yet another polarizing issue, as if we needed another polarizing issue of whether we should be working at an office or at home or something in between, which in some people say the hybrid is the worst possible of all, because when you're in the office and nobody else is there, you've removed the people part of what made the office valuable, and you're sitting on Zoom. So I would, again, I kind of look at my role and as a sociologist as debunking a lot of myths, and there have been a lot of them since 2020 around work, around getting ahead. And one of the biggest ones that really just took off is how everybody wants to work from home. And of course, there's so much inequality here because only about 35% of work can be done at home. So a lot of people are, they're checking your bags at the airport, they can't work from home. So they're not necessarily able to. But I would say one of the big things that's lost, and I think we have to keep this in mind when you're thinking about why would somebody stay at this organization and be committed to it versus leaving for more money. And often one of the big things is they have some kind of voice and connection to what's happening with other people. I've been to the I've got a lot of flack from my friends and others. I've actually been a big proponent of, we have to be careful about getting rid of the office, because what will happen if we do? I think we have to answer that question. I get there's a lot of hate that comes at me, like, including from my partner. But when I work at home with my partner and hear all day, Zoom after Zoom after Zoom, expletives, a bad day at work is a bad day at home, and that's a bad day for me because I study work, and I'm not a therapist, but I become one. But I've talked to people who miss, it might sound trite, and I know there's pushback against this, but some people miss the coordination that comes with just being able to walk by somebody's office and have as Larry David would say on Curb Your Enthusiasm, a stop and chat. Some people hate the stop and chat because it's an interruption, but other people love the stop and chat because they can talk about it in 5 minutes instead of a 30-minute Zoom call, which wastes time. And I don't want to talk about my summer on the Zoom call. But if you stop and chat with me, I'll talk to you in person, because that actually is more meaningful than people realize. And so I know I'm going to get hate mail on that, but I've always said, and I've always hated this notion of workers being forced back to the office. It's a very strange term, or forced. But I mean, what's the office for? Okay,
yeah.
Here we go.
No, but it's good. The thing is that when you think about the talent, that next generation, they're lacking potentially the water cooler conversations where they learn from, the baby boomers and the Gen X's. And that's a really difficult thing when we're talking about mentorships and the generation is retiring soon, right? And so we're missing that type of engagement and that connection between all the different generations as we're trying to develop the talent and the skills for the next generation of future leaders. And so that's a huge component that we have to look at and consider. So.
Absolutely. Candice, what do you see in the future of work arrangements for Canadian employers?
It would be interesting to see if the notion of 5 days or even come back one day. I don't know. I don't want to create a debate on that. That being said, I think we could see something in the middle. But Linda spoke earlier about purpose and impact. I often talk about outcome over presence. Which is incredibly important. And, for us, we just recently went from 2 days a week to 3. And some of the conversation we had with our employees was, the importance of the in-person connection, which for us was somewhat easy to sell in the sense that, if you're going to spend 4 or 5 weeks at the Olympics every day with your colleagues, you probably want to get to know them before it actually happens. So we are fostering different ways of ensuring that there are in-person connections that are meaningful, and that makes that on the long run, they understand, oh, this is why it was so great to come to the office and meet so-and-so and so-and-so, because on the long run, I was actually going to need to collaborate with them very closely at one point. So I think we are leaning toward a future where there might be something in the middle, but we're going to, this notion of purpose and impact, we talk about more and more, but I think we're going to hear this certainly in a consistent way for some time.
I want to end off with sort of some key takeaways and actions that people can take on their own. So a rapid fire with the three of you. What's one easy thing you'd suggest to the leaders in this room that they can do tomorrow to help their firms attract top talent? Candice, we'll start with you.
I would say define your superpower. What's unique about your organization? What makes that it's great to come here than here? I'm pretty clear, but
You're wearing it.
I'm wearing it, but define what's your superpower.
For employers, what would I say to employers?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the big things that's really emerging is a negativity about work within organizations, and I've tracked the perceptions within organizations about this. This is a big threat, the more negativity within organizations that can exist in people's minds than actually exists in reality. It's a whole other topic, but it's a powerful one that we've seen. So you can have very satisfied workers, but they think the morale is quite low or not as high. It can really have a devastating effect. So keep your eyes on misperceptions in the workplace and among your workers. It's devastating for turnover.
That's a good one.
Candice, I think you took mine. I'm like, okay, I think when it comes to value proposition, one thing comes to mind is work on your employee engagement because they will speak for your organization and company, and that will trigger a lot of different positive movements, right? And so really, if it comes to value proposition, that's the one thing that comes to mind is work on that, try to find ways to increase your employee engagement. They are your best referrals, they are your best value proposition, they're your brand, they're all of that, and that will help in terms of that. So.
Some great tips to end off. So employee engagement, be on the radar for misconceptions about morale in your company, and define your superpowers. Such great tips. Thank you so much, Candice, Scott, and Linda, for this fascinating conversation. I think we all learned a lot. Let's give it to them. We're going to stop for a 20-minute intermission, take a moment to recharge, get a drink, stretch your legs, and then we'll reconvene shortly. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. I hope everyone had a drink and a snack. We're now going to have a conversation about something that we've alluded to in all the other talks that we've had, which is AI and hiring. So helping to unpack this nuanced topic is Tamar El-Sayuni, founder and talent strategist at Talent Engagement Consulting. And I will just say, toward the end, we will have time for audience questions, so start thinking of your questions now. Hopefully this is a pretty practical conversation. Also, if you are watching online, feel free to include your questions, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So please join me in welcoming Tamara. Yeah, thanks for being here. All right, let's start off with just having you tell us a bit about your company and what you do.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Thank you for having me as well among those very impressive speakers and subject matter experts. My name is Tamara. Last name pronounced El Sayuni. It's more overwhelming when you read it than when you pronounce it. So I've been in the talent world for over 20 years, and a couple of years ago, I kind of took a look at my career, and just like the previous panel was talking about, what do I want really, what do I value? So I decided to open my own shop and provide mainly HR and talent consulting to small to mid-sized organizations and recruitment. The reason is I thought I can bring more diversity and expertise from the different clients I'm working with, kind of like an AI agent. I'm collecting all the information and bringing it back at the best presentation to my current clients.
All right, so I think a big question on a lot of people's minds now is like what AI is actually capable of and what HR pros are using it for now. So maybe just set the scene for us a little bit. Like, what did hiring look like 5 or 10 years ago before AI was even like something people were using? So dozens or maybe hundreds of people would submit resumes, and then what would happen in this case 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, AI, oof, everyone is talking about it, and there's lots of apprehension, yet desire. There's also, we talked about generational differences. You know, we have the younger generation that is eager to use it. It's, why do I want to waste my time doing some repetitive tasks when AI can do it for me? Why do I need to learn some stuff when I can just get it out of AI? And you have, as we have seen in general, the older generation that's a bit wary because they've been through a lot. So many changes have accompanied the human evolution and the work evolution that we now know better than not to be, completely and thrown into the whistles and bells of something new. But AI definitely is changing the hiring game. And the thing is, it has different levels and different scales, right? So it can be used as easy as sorting through resumes, or as evolved as being generative AI and acting as an agent and really interviewing candidates. So how did it impact the hiring? So think about it this way. 5-10 years ago, a small to mid-sized organization using an applicant tracking system would receive a minimum of, let's say on average, 400 to 500 applications for a regular job. I was talking to Linda from Nokia, and then she was explaining they receive about 3,000 applications per some of their jobs. So you can imagine when you need humans or recruiters going through those applications. Even if you're using an applicant tracking system and you're having some screening in it, like keywords, whatever, you're never gonna get enough applications. You're gonna be ending up with 200, 150. Then you have your recruiters going through them, and you have to schedule the interviews and then do the pre-screening and coordinate with the hiring manager. This is like a full-time, job for 1 week. Like you're dedicating maybe 40 hours to it. AI comes in, and in a matter of minutes, if not seconds, you have even 3,000 to 500 applications. You put your criteria, and there you go. I want to see just 50 or 20 of them. So now you have 20, and then out of those 20, AI is capable of communicating with the candidates, scheduling them for an interview or asking them pre-screen questions. If you're leveraging AI interviewing, they can even analyze their answers, analyze sometimes their facial expressions, scary, but get you a shorter list. So this is maybe in a matter of 24 hours, 48 hours, because humans need time to schedule their time. So there you go. You have even reduced your time to hire in tremendously, 80%. And then you also might have controlled some of the bias you have as a recruiter and human going through all of these applications, like the fatigue, like, our own human bias. So it's tremendous in terms of savings of time and efficiencies.
So when it comes to the interview stage, is AI doing the interviewing, or is a human doing the interviewing and they're recording it and then using the answers plus maybe facial recognition or something to analyze how the interview went, basically? And can AI pick a candidate?
Yeah, so what I've known so far, what I've seen in the market is you as the recruiter or the hiring manager, you're mainly defining what are the criteria that you want. So, and the AI will help you with putting those questions that will screen for those criteria. Then they're sending a link to the candidate. The candidate is really answering the questions, and AI is analyzing those questions with some of them are enabled with facial expressions or body language, which I'm like really not very convinced about it because we're humans after all. But so it's AI. I haven't seen an interactive AI yet in terms of AI agent and interviewing being implemented. Probably it is in beta, and probably lots of organizations are thinking about it, but I haven't seen it implemented, and I kind of doubt this is being used at large scale. It's very scary and it's very uncertain.
We see some studies that show when businesses are implementing AI, it actually creates more work for the employees initially. When it comes to HR, are these tools like speeding up hiring, or is it ultimately, like you talked about, it's all about putting in the prompts? Is this just creating a lot of extra work for the HR people?
That's a good question. I think it all depends. It depends on your workforce, how tech savvy or tech curious they are. It also depends on your organization, how nimble you are, and on the tool you're using. I find with people that are tech curious, tech savvy, they're much faster at adopting and they actually want to adopt it. And people that struggle with technology, they will need lots of change management to get it implemented. I also have seen in larger organizations, it's always, initiatives are always so much, more time consuming to be implemented. You need so many approvals. IT is always so concerned about privacy and security. Finance is concerned, right?
Because some of the tools cost a lot of money.
They do. And the change management of it costs money. And the consultants you have to hire and the information system, consultants that you have to hire, that all cost money. And the testing that you have to do. I mean, I'll share later a really funny story that I've done playing around with an AI interviewing tool. The idea of it is like a great dream idea for all of us HR professionals, that someone's going to be able to to do most of the work for you, just like having this superhuman, intelligent, assistant who knows how you think and then just gets you your stuff ready and you just have to put your last touches on it. But in reality, it's not.
I want to get to your example in a minute, but I will just share an example. I also oversee the drive section, the car section, and I've been covering self-driving cars for 10 years, and it always seems like it's like a few years away, and we're still probably just a few years away. But I think when Uber got into self-driving cars, they were hoping to eliminate the drivers and really start making a lot of money. But over the years, they've realized it is a lot more complicated and also a lot more expensive than they would have ever thought. So like those cars that are actually driving people around the streets of like Phoenix or San Francisco, the Google cars, they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So at the end of the day, it's still probably cheaper to have the people driving the cars and like a little bit safer. So yes, but I want to hear your example that you just alluded to before.
Yeah, I'll add to what you're saying. Some of you might be familiar with Klarna. It's a tech company. So Klarna recently has been in the news where they went in and they said, "Oh, AI can do the job so much better. So going forward, we're just freezing all hires. We're not hiring anyone," and they laid off 700 people. They replaced all their mainly customer service, most of their operations with AI. So at the beginning, maybe a couple of weeks, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's working really well." And now guess what? They're like, "Oh no, people don't want to talk with AI. People want to talk with people." So they're going back and reversing some of their decision and rehiring some people and opening back the hiring.
So on that note, how do people feel about being interviewed by AI? Or do they, when they submit their resume, do you have a sense of how like job seekers feel about like AI going through their resumes?
Yes. So also it depends. It depends on the expectations and on the roles. Some roles with high volume, and we're talking, retail, front-facing, and they are usually younger generation. They're more tech savvy. They even don't want to talk to anyone. Like, how people text now, our younger generation. They don't want to talk to you. They just want to text, right? So when you're leveraging AI with chatbots or communication, application, and status of application, it seems that people are accepting it, and actually they want it. It's easier for them. It's faster. When you go to different areas and more advanced areas in the hiring, like when AI interviewing, for example, I've had many candidates really declining and saying, I don't feel this is fair to me. I don't want to go through an AI interviewing stage. I want to be interviewed by a human.
Do companies have to tell people when they are using AI in the process?
Yes. So Ontario introduced the legislation lately, and as of, I believe, January 2026, organizations have to declare if they're using AI in their hiring process. I think New York already introduced it. Canada, in general, is drafting an AI act. Hopefully that's coming up soon. Europe, EU has more stringent rules around AI. Yes, they do.
Do you think with this kind of transparency that eventually people will get, like job seekers will get used to the idea that AI is being used at certain points and will just like accept it and learn to work with it?
In HR, and for people, everything it depends, right? It depends on the role, it depends on the position. When I was hiring for doctors, why would doctors need to use AI? They're just so high in demand. You're just literally begging them to work for you, right? If you're going to use AI, you have other companies that are going to them. When some other roles are just inherently, you can embed AI inherently in the process because people want it. I really think it depends. We also talk a lot here. We have amazing leaders in key corporate organizations, but I work with people with clients in the ag industry, for example, in the agricultural industry. Farmers are not going to use AI. They don't want it. They don't need it. It's not the nature of the job. Skilled trade, usually they don't use AI. So it all depends. I don't think we can use a blanket to everything,
But farming is one of the biggest industries that has been affected by, digitization or computerization. One farmer can control a massive field now. So
with machines,
yeah.
right? With machines. But then there is the previous panel spoke about recognition and about values and about your identity. Work a lot of times for us humans is our identity, constitute our identity, or becomes one. So definitely the leveraging of automation, of machines and AI can be used in all areas of life. But is it gonna take over our lives and take over our works? I personally do not believe so.
All right, well, we'll get back to hiring. Is there anything that AI can't do or you don't think should be used to do at this point?
I don't think AI should make decisions.
Especially can AI right now make recommendations?
100%. I want to share this. By the nature of my work, I have lots of vendors usually approaching me and asking me to test sometimes their products or try it. And there was one AI interviewing product that one of my clients accepted to test it. So we were hiring for an operations leader role. And the AI mainly, you set the criteria, send the link, and candidates would answer the questions. AI would analyze and recommend the first 3 people. So we wanted to play around with it, and so we had the senior leader, the senior director of the department apply, and we had one candidate who was mainly referred. The leader knew this candidate from their life before, as you know, and they really knew him. He was the right person for the job, but we needed to go through the process. So that candidate who does already the job really well applied, their leader applied, and we had quite a few hundred of resumes there. Now, the cool thing for me as a recruiter, I'm looking, and usually I only need to shortlist like 8 or 10 people to pre-screen, right? Because I'm conscious about my time. But now my pool can be bigger. Well, like you meet 10% of the job, okay, here's the link. You're doing the work, right? So I kind of send the link to 30 people to do the interview. Surprisingly, out of the 3 recommended candidates, none of the current leader or the candidate who's already doing the job were selected.
So those people got fired, right?
No, AI got fired. AI got fired. But this is to say that AI, like everything, it's actually you're the human who's telling AI what do you want, right? It's the prompt. And so, yeah, to answer your question, AI should not make decisions at all about humans.
What are some of the ethical issues right now about using AI?
Yeah, good question. There are definitely biases. If I remember well, I think Amazon discovered like a bias against women in one of their processes because of AI. So AI is how you build it, right? There are some biases that can come in. There are as well. I don't think AI can be able to spot people with non-traditional, non-conventional career path, right? Or people who have taken a gap year, or even neurodivergent people, so diversity hires. Ethically, it might not be fair. People might not have the access to technology. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, it might not be fair. Also, AI is a machine. It's 1 + 1 = 2. While you as a human, when you're talking to people and considering people, you're able to identify potential that AI is not able to identify.
Can people work through some of these ethical issues through the prompts?
I think you can try, but I can't trust it. I personally am just too... I can't trust it because in my career, I've really hired people who were not hireable, quote unquote, and they became amazing, like amazing talent at organizations. And I don't think, it can be done through AI or it could be prompted. I use AI all the time. Like I'm a big AI fan, but I know its limitations.
You alluded to it a bit before in your story and through some of the other answers, but like what type of people does AI miss? Like we've spoken about, like on the first panel I was at, we spoke a lot about the skills mismatch and how companies need to be thinking about hiring for the soft skills and then training for the hard skills. But like it seems like something like AI would be very focused on the hard skills. So I guess my question is like, is there a way to train the AI to focus more on the soft skills, or is that just not possible?
Hearing AI specialists, they say yes. Especially now, for example, we're moving in the workforce towards more skills-based hiring, right? So we're just, and it's a machine. I do believe you can train it. You can train it to identify patterns, for example, across hundreds and thousands of resumes, which usually a human is not sometimes capable to do, or they need a lot of time to do. So there's definitely a piece of it that's trainable, and then you can prompt and have it. And I'm kind of excited to see how it's going to look like, especially with the skills-based hiring. It's a bit unclear to people how to go about it. How do I identify some of the skills? How do I screen for them? And how do I make sure that I'm equitable and my judgment is correct? So yeah, I think that it's trainable. That's what I'm hearing in the market, but I haven't tried it yet.
In some, I guess, earlier story, but a few years ago, we were doing starting to do stories on AI, and one of the things HR people were saying was this has enabled so many more candidates to apply. Because you can put a few things into ChatGPT and it can spit out this like great looking resume and cover letter. And now instead of getting like hundreds, they're getting thousands of applicants for any given role. But is there a way job seekers can use, like if they know a company is using AI to filter out candidates or do some sort of screening process, is there a way that job seekers can use it to their advantage?
I mean, I think all job seekers should use it. I definitely encourage it because it's a learning process as well. Like when you're, you can't trust everyone to be so eloquent and so proficient and polished in putting their resumes. And that has been job seekers' complaints for as long as we know with the introduction of applicant tracking systems. And people started having tips like, put those keywords and then color them in white so the ATS can pick them up so I can be picked up. So I think definitely it should be used. And it's funny because one time I was moderating a panel about AI and the pros and the cons, and one of the audience is like, so what are you doing? You're using AI to screen our applications. We're using AI to get into here. Who's doing the job actually? And this is what I say. This is why human judgment is needed. This is why you can never just rely on machines 100%. But I do think they should use it. I have 2 teenagers. I tell them every time they ask me a question, I go like, did you ask ChatGPT? Did you ask AI? Because I think it's a learning. The learning is not for you just to memorize stuff. It's to see what's happening and get more ideas. I mean, today AI has access to a humongous database of ideas and thoughts and practices. Why not bring them to the front and then show your capability as a human and then your judgment on what do you want to use and how do you want to use it?
So if a job seeker is using AI to work on a cover letter, let's say, what advice would you have for them and where they can start or what sort of prompts they can use?
Well, I mean, I've used it, and I think you can. First of all, you can tell AI, what do you want? What's your end objective? What do you want out of this? You want to apply for this job. And then what do you think you can bring to this job? And then in your own words, right? What people struggle with the most is being able to articulate how they fit the position and then how their experience is relevant to the position. So if you're asking AI, and tell AI, ask me questions. How can I bring up my experience and my skills to match with this job? And so when AI really responds to you, you gotta as well put it in your own words and then read it. Does it really apply to me or not? And if not, let's keep prompting. Like, I don't think this applies to me, but this is what I've done. Can you articulate it in a different way? So this is a kind of skill as well. This is a kind of skill of being able to communicate with AI, is being adaptable and fine-tuning bit by bit. What do you really want out of this?
So I would put in ChatGPT, highlight how good I am at working with ChatGPT into AI for the...
Ask me a question, how can I become better, for example, yeah.
I have a lot more questions, but I do want to open the floor for the last little bit of this. If anybody has a question, we do have 2 mics on the floor, but I do ask, I will point to you, but I will ask that you wait for the microphone before you start asking the question. And I see one hand right here.
Thank you very much. Artificial intelligence is a misnomer. There is nothing intelligent about artificial intelligence. It's an algorithm which is self-replicating. And for me, the issue is judgment. That is the sense of nuance. And we are becoming so over-hypertext. We are lacking what I call epistemic, ontologic judgment in terms of capacity. Agreed, we all have different capacities in terms of intelligence and life experiences. And HR are designed to discriminate, in a sense, to find what it is that they're seeking. And in some positions, it's easier. If you're looking for technical, it's easier. But let's say for journalism, I mean, writing skills is important, but what about the research that cannot be detected? It's a question of what I call balance, because HR can be actually on one level very dry. It also can be very, very exciting, because several years ago, I was tasked to find PMCs, private military contractors, for entity down in West Africa. And there are certain kinetic skills, but then there's what I call nuances, and I was looking for ethics. And it was also again, dealing with the organization. So the pitch I'm making, artificial intelligence is actually taking us it's nothing intelligent about it. It's a fast-paced algorithm. It's digital, it's silicon, and there's nothing intelligent about it. It can be and it's in terms of bias. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond to that?
I mean, I respect your point of view, and that definitely applies to certain maybe areas, certain positions. They call it intelligence maybe because it does collect a lot of the practices and ideas and thoughts, and it processes them with speed that humans cannot do. But I am aligned with you that judgment should only stay with humans.
I see a question right here.
Hello. Okay, I just wanted to ask, in terms of confidentiality, are there candidates that may fear that their being out on the job market be known through AI, working through AI?
Elaborate more.
He's applying for a job, their names, their data, their information. How are they guaranteed confidentiality?
I don't think they are guaranteed confidentiality, and I think this is one of the biggest concerns in organizations, especially big organizations, more secure ones. This is why they're reluctant to introduce AI. It's an open source. So in today's world, there's none, and this is why as well the governments are feeling they have to step in to regulate that. But anyone that's going, just like we tell our teenagers, our kids, anything that goes online, it's just not your ownership anymore.
Thank you. This is why I was asking the question.
So if employers are using AI and they're putting the information in, does that suddenly be fed into the AI? Is it open source and other people can get access to it?
I believe, it depends what you're using, and if it's ChatGPT declares it. Everything you put in there becomes public and becomes part of the processing knowledge of AI. And lots of vendors today in the hiring world or the HR world are also reluctant in introducing AI. Everyone is just so excited about it, but they want to make sure that there are regulations and rules of privacy and confidentiality. Especially in Canada, we do have some strict PIPEDA rules that as well mandate the storage of data in Canada. So, yeah.
I saw one more question over there.
Thank you so much for the discussion today and appreciate all the insights. On one side, we talked a lot about how organizations are benefiting from the expansion of information that they can get about candidates. And I'm wondering if in your experience, Tamara, if you found companies that are now worried about candidates having that same level of information and the ability to democratize data on their end, that they might be able to game the system. To their benefit. So what's your response perhaps to organizations that are, perhaps looking to still get down to, making a good decision about hiring when perhaps those are candidates that now have access to AI themselves for a good reason?
Thank you, Farzine. I guess we touched a little bit on it. I think everyone should expect candidates now to leverage AI. We had a professor in universities, you have all these AI spotting softwares. So when students use them, you have the counter usage. I think it's a message to us humans as well that the humans need to still to be involved in the process. There are roles when I recruit for Farzine, I want the candidate to be using AI. When the candidate is presenting themselves with very basic, sometimes articulation, they haven't used it. I wonder why. You just need to show some adaptability as well, and then some embracing of the new technology. Have you tried it? Have you used it to your advantage in certain ways? But always using your judgment, right? It's because, again, I can put the same prompt for AI, and then you can do it, and then we'll get the same thing at the end of the day, right? Every time I ask AI for stuff, I doubt that it's the same generic answer that's being given to millions of people at the same time. And this is where my expertise comes. I wanted to relieve some of those administrative small tasks that I don't want to think about, but I also want to fine-tune it to what I need. And so this is where I think organizations, and sometimes when you're talking at scale, it's a bit difficult. But you gotta play around with it, just like we've done. Test it. Is it really understanding what you're giving it, and is it really giving you what you want?
I just want to ask. Sorry, we're out of time for questions and wrapping up, but I just want to ask one more question, and I think it's a big question that a lot of HR pros are wondering: is this technology, is it actually making the hiring process faster and better, and is it leading to better hires?
Faster, yes, 100%. What was the second one?
Is it leading to better hires?
Oh, better hires. Well, you had faster, you had
faster,
yes.
easier.
Easier, yes. Better hires, it depends. I don't know. But also, when you're in recruitment or you're a hiring manager, you have FOMO. What if someone else was better than that one? If you didn't fall in love with the candidate you're recruiting, and sometimes you're recruiting them because, well, they have the right skills. And, for diversity and inclusion, I just need to get this person in, or I just need to get it because I have so much work and I can't keep going. I'm like burnt out, my team is. So we don't know. I don't know if it's better. Sometimes it is in I think, high volume positions where turnover is expected and it's not really, it's not really high stakes. But in other positions, I think, I think not, unless it is balanced with human judgment.
This has been really fascinating. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for sharing all that insight. And please join me in giving Tamara a round of applause.
Thank you.
For today's final session, we'll zoom out to examine the broader landscape of the world of work and consider what the future may hold for employers. We are honored to have Linda Nazareth, economist and senior fellow at the Macdonald's Laurier Institute, lead us through an insightful presentation on the topic. She'll be taking audience questions toward the end, so please submit them via the Q&A box if you're online, or when the time comes, raise your hand. Please join me in welcoming Linda.
Good morning. Real pleasure to be with you. I love being with groups like this where you're actually in the trenches, you are making decisions, you are shaping this future. It's been really interesting to hear everyone's viewpoints earlier, so much information. I'm going to ask you about yours now. If you had to boil it down, if I gave everybody in this room a t-shirt and said, put on your t-shirt just a phrase about how you feel about the future of work and guiding people through this future of work, what would you write? Think about it for a second. And some groups like to tell me, and some just like to whisper or be scared or whatever else. Anybody want to share? Be authentic. Oh, I like that. I haven't heard that before.
Cautiously optimistic.
I like optimistic. Resilience and adaptability, I like that. Sometimes people say I'm scared. Sometimes people say we're doomed. Depends on the industry and how they're feeling about their particular work group or whatever else. But, it's kind of a work in progress, right? We're all figuring out what we want to put on that t-shirt and how to make decisions to make it happen if we're trying to be resilient or we're trying to make the optimism into reality. So we're learning and we're together, and there's so much that we have to process. I'm going to argue that if we're going to succeed at doing this, if we're going to have the kind of future where we have a great workforce, and your organizations have the right people to take us forward, the right talent, you and your organizations are going to have a growth mindset. You have to have a growth mindset. And you may know the term. It's been around since the 70s from the psychology literature. The idea is that a fixed mindset sometimes works, where you say, I know what kind of person I want to hire. We know what this organization needs. I know how to do things. There's no point changing things. If it's not broken, why fix it? I don't need a lot of feedback. I kind of know, what works. It's the mindset that a lot of entrepreneurs have. They have a product and they can go forward to a certain extent. But in the environment we have now, where so much is changing, where you don't know who your client is, and your customer is, and your world is, I think you have to have the growth mindset where you are willing to fail, where you're willing to hire somebody who maybe is against the norm, but you can experiment with that. And also, where you're okay with making mistakes and saying we're trying something because the world is changing and it may not work, but we can be okay with that because that's the only way forward. Because, you know, it is an era where these are the skills we are going to need. This comes from the World Economic Forum. They do the Future of Jobs report every year. And these are the qualities that the C-suite globally says they want to see in their workforce. And they are things like resilience and flexibility and empathy. And I'm not the expert. I don't know if AI is really doing a good job of screening for empathy. I'm going to say no. So how are we going to get those people when we're not necessarily set up to get those skills? And maybe you'd argue for different skills, but in the world we have, I'd say we need creative thinking and we need, yes, technological literacy, but leadership, real leadership and dependability and a lot of different things which are hard to pin down. Because, yeah, we have these megatrends that are changing the world. These days I talk about future work, but I started as a Bay Street economist, and now I'm looking at what's going on in terms of trade and in terms of interest rates and in terms of the global economy, and I've never seen such a lack of clarity. And you hear this from the leaders. We had the Federal Reserve this week decide to leave rates on hold. Chair Powell said, you know, we don't have any clarity out there. So that means whatever organization you're working for doesn't have the clarity either. And this is a problem because every economic cycle, there are cutbacks, right? There has to be cost savings. And unfortunately, it's often the things that are going to matter long term in terms of human resource development that get cut and that are thought of as being a cost center. I don't think human resources is really a cost center, but sometimes it gets put in that box. So we have to be really careful about what this economic cycle will do to the decisions we make. The demographics are challenging, absolutely. We talked a lot about this, but I kind of like looking at it this way. The darker the coloring is, the older the workforce is. And Canada's really up there, right? Where we have a median age which is above 40. If we were in the 1970s, it would be below 30. So we've really made a shift. We're older than the US. We're in a different place than we were. There are good and bad parts of this. I think someone alluded to this earlier, that because we have an older workforce, it's having an impact on the unemployment rate. This comes from, sorry, I won't do a whole lot of graphs, but I am an economist, okay, I'm going to do some. This comes from the Reserve Bank of Australia, I believe, or New Zealand, and they looked at what the unemployment rate would look like if we had the same demographic breakdown that we had 20 years ago. And just look at Canada. You can see where the unemployment rate, if we had the same participation rate, the same percentage of the workforce that was working, and you can see the working age population has changed substantially, and that means the unemployment rate would have been much higher if we had younger people. Now we have a lot of people who've left the workforce or are working part-time. We don't have as many 20-somethings, and that means we have, even at 7% now, which is relatively high, we would have had a much higher unemployment rate right now. Good and bad, if you're looking for people, maybe it makes it a little bit more difficult. For public policy, it changes things, but we're definitely in a different place. Definitely would have a different picture if we'd had a younger workforce than this. It means our working age population is growing slowly. This comes from the Government of Canada, COPS program. You can see where we were in the 80s in terms of the population 15 plus and the working age population, the blue bars, and where the growth is right now. It's not what it was. And if we look at the workforce population by age, and this goes up to 2033, we are definitely older. That green bar, which is the youngest part of the population, 15 to 24, is not what it was. And the 25 to 34 is not what it was either in terms of the total. So, you know, we know this is our reality, but it's not going to change anytime soon. Technology, you just talked about AI. I look at this as, yes, it's huge. It means huge decision making, things that you'll have to think about, but it also means huge stress on organizations and huge stress on individuals that we will have to manage. It's very much a revolution. We've had the revolution where in the 1800s we got the steam engine, and we got the weaving loom, then we had the one that gave us mass production, the assembly line. We had the one in the 1960s that gave us automation and computers and electronics. And then we had cyber physical systems. We thought that was going to be the Internet of Things. We thought that was going to be as revolutionary as we got. And now we have AI absolutely changing everything. And again, it adds to the lack of clarity. When you're going to be bringing in AI and making decisions, who are the people, the managers you need right now? It makes it that much more difficult, and we need different qualities. Climate, I don't think we've talked much about that this morning, but to me this is gigantic. Every organization will have to have skills around climate. Not just managers to brief the board about climate, but every decision maker will have to think about the costs of climate. We're going to have a lot of disruptions around this. We're used to the pandemic shutting things down. We got used to that. But what about if it's a flood? Or what about if it's a weather event? We're seeing this all across the country. As it disrupts our businesses, as it impacts the bottom line, that will necessitate a different set of skills to get through that. So given all of this, given that we have these megatrends changing the world, what's it going to take to be a superstar employer? What's it going to take for you to be the destination of choice for the absolute best candidates? Not just to start there, but to stay there and to build what you want. And there's a lot of parts to this. First of all, I think workers are absolutely going to demand more, because they will have a little bit more bargaining power, but because they're a little bit different. I mean, we talked about generations in the workforce. Younger generations know what's available in terms of tech. They know they can possibly work at home. They know that the old models aren't necessarily going to hold. And there will be, I think just in general, an asking for more things. They won't always get them, but I don't think there'll be as much going along with things as perhaps organizations have seen in the past. And it's not just about money, and I know we discussed this earlier. There's lots of surveys on this one. I like this one from Resume Builder just because it showed pay too low at the top, yes, why people want to, are likely to quit, but so many other things. You know, they want more benefits, they want less stress, they want a nicer work environment, they want more training. It's a very complicated algorithm, personally, for people to decide where to be. And it's a lot to juggle, giving everyone everything they want. There are push and pull reasons for people leaving, right? There are reasons people want to quit, and there are reasons why people want to go to another organization. And they are happening all the time. If you talk about the economic environment, one of the main reasons you may see over the next few years is people will be worried about the organization they're in and say, look, is my job, is my group going to be here in a year, or should I jump ship to somewhere more stable? And part of keeping people is keeping them informed and letting them know how your organization fits into what's going on and whether they will be safe, or assuring them that they will be safe so they don't jump ship. The biggest push, though, is unhappiness. And again, that's a hard thing for AI to grasp. It's something managers have to try and grasp, and managers may be unhappy too. There's actually a number you can put to this. There's lots of numbers, but the University of Oxford in Britain with other universities did a study on this and said happier workers are 13% more productive. And that's just a number, but they looked at things like a call center, and they did surveys asking people, how they felt about various things. They also did experiments giving them something like a snack that would make them happy, and say, how much did they perform after they got the thing that made them happy. And what they came down to is if people are unhappy, they will do less, and if they're happy, they will do more. And we know this, but it's sometimes good to realize that you want to have a workforce that's engaged, but isn't miserable either. And there's lots of ways to make that happen. I have a podcast called Work in the Future. It's an unapologetic plug for it because I get a lot of smart people on talking to me about what's going on in their workplaces and what they're studying and all different parts of this. I started it in 2020 when I had a little bit more time during the pandemic, and I've been kind of surveying the mood ever since. And what's come through to me is that managers are often on their own trying to fix whatever. In 2020, they were on their own trying to figure out how to manage a remote workforce. They weren't given a lot of backup, they weren't given a lot of training, they weren't necessarily even people who had managed before, but they were told to make it happen. And I think that is still true. I still hear that people are being asked to do an awful lot as managers and don't always feel like they have been given adequate guidance to make the right decision. So, of course, a lot of the time you don't have as much happiness and productivity as you want. But you can also put a number to how much this is costing companies. This is a US number, obviously, but if you have a medium-sized company and you are losing productivity, and they have a whole study on this, it's costing in the millions of dollars. That's really too much to give away in this economic environment, saying it's going to cost, and maybe it's a smaller company, it's less, but if you're not getting full productivity for people, there's an absolute cost to that. Moral injuries. We see this all the time. We don't always put a name to it, but it's something else I've found fascinating and first heard about it in a big way during the pandemic too. We know what a physical injury is, right? Somebody gets hurt on a job site or whatever, but a moral injury is much more subtle. It's when you ask someone to do something that they think wounds them morally. If you ask your team to go out and if you ask a manager to go out and tell their team, you're safe, don't worry, we're not laying off anybody, but you know you are laying off people. You may feel that goes against your morals. And that makes people unhappy and less productive and more likely to quit. We see it often in healthcare, when doctors at inner city hospitals, nurses quit because they're trying to do their best and maybe they feel they don't have the support, they don't have the resources to do their best. You see it in teachers in inner cities too, where they feel like they can't help people and that wounds them. It may be in a much smaller sense that we see this in the corporate world, but we do see it. And it comes down to people wanting truth and meaning and morality from the organizations they work for. They want to feel like they're doing something that is meaningful, but that is respecting them as a person and letting them perform their best. And again, we see this all the time. Workers also expect to have a voice. And again, this is something that sometimes goes away when the economy gets soft, I'm not talking about an old, the idea of a suggestion box you used to see in all TV shows where people put their suggestions in the box and maybe they were thrown away or nobody looked at them or whatever else. Now maybe we do it electronically, but it's a hard thing. We know when workers are on the front lines, they see things that management maybe doesn't see. You think about a company like Boeing, where they have had so many airline mishaps, and as it turns out, at one point, there were engineers and people on the line telling them that they had misgivings about production. And at one point, with I forget which model plane it was, they were told by somebody there that he was formerly in the military, and if he was still in the military, they would have shut down the whole production process. He was told, this is not the military, and we have different metrics, so we're going to keep going and crash that plane. They didn't expect to crash the plane, but they did. So if workers have something to say, we saw it with Disney too, right? Remember the alligators in the water that ultimately attacked a child? Workers had been saying for years that there's alligators in the water and were ignored because, well, I don't know why, but they were ignored. So workers have a voice. They expect to have a voice in an organization, and it's very difficult. A lot of our organizations are still built on kind of the old-style military model of the leaders talk and everybody else listens. And one of the things that came about on the podcast is somebody said to me, we think about management as being about telling people what to do, but the really hard thing to do is listen. And I would argue that in the environment we have, with the megatrends we have, with the amount of change that's going on, the really important thing will be listening. And that's not an easy thing to do. Purpose, yes, everybody wants to know where their job fits in the larger reality. And arguably, it fits in the intersection of 4 different circles, where one is what the world needs, one is what the company is uniquely good at, one is how the company can create economic value, and the 4th is what people at the company are passionate about. And it takes a lot of communication to let people know where they fit in that. But if you get the worker who feels like they understand, that person is a lot less likely to jump ship and go somewhere else. And workers absolutely expect this from business, okay? In terms of the clientele, they expect business to do the things that matter to them. They believe that business has an influence over the environment and equity and the ethical use of technology. This is from a 2024 study in the US of Gen Z and millennials, who are the people you are still bringing in. I know the alphas will be next, but the core of your workforce, a lot of your hires will be here. And it matters a lot to them that they see the right answers to the question of how do you deal with social equity and the environment from the companies that they decide to work for. And maybe not in the next 2 years when the economy's softening and you hire them, maybe longer term. Maybe it's another firm that will tell them that they have a mastery of this. I spoke to the forestry industry, I think last year, and it's a huge thing, right? That workers don't want to think there's greenwashing, that they're being told we're ethical and we care about the environment. They want to really feel that this is the reality. And if you want to get younger people into that business, you need to communicate that. And yeah, it does come down sometimes to wanting balance. I kind of almost feel like this is a retro term, right? We talk about it a little bit, but it's not as hot a topic perhaps as it was. Certainly remote work, maybe you've had a session on this 3 years ago just on remote work, or if it was 3 years ago, everybody would have a session on remote work. Now it's sort of like, well, there's been this decision that we're not going to be fully remote, we're going to bring back people to the office 3 days a week, or 4 days a week, or 5 days a week, and you can't work offshore or whatever else. I would argue that it's premature to say we've made any decisions. First of all, in terms of climate, it's really going to be hard to make the argument that everybody has to come into work that often. I think at some point, companies, organizations will be asked, whether by government or by workers, or asked to put in their annual report, what is your climate footprint? What are you generating in terms of energy? What are the costs of bringing people into work every day? Are they going to be on the gardener? Are they going to be at home using energy that way? Like, it will be another piece of that puzzle. Plus, I would argue that we don't have a consensus even amongst companies, where some companies believe this is absolutely not necessary, or not necessary all of the time. And the other extreme, we have Mr. Diamond from JP Morgan. And I can't even use the language to tell you what he thinks of remote work, okay? He's very, very sure that only really lazy, useless would-be workers are asking to not be in the office. And we don't think that's true either. I don't think that's true at all. Yes, there's something to be said, as we heard earlier, for the water cooler effect. I would not argue against that. But there's not necessarily one way to create that. We did do it somewhat when we were all working remotely. Yes, not every idea of doing a virtual quilt together was great, but not every team building idea when we're together is great either, right? So we have to figure out the right mix on this one. And I would say, again, it's very early in the process to say we've decided what it would be. There's lots of surveys on this, and you could probably find one that tells something different. But all I would say is when you ask about working from home, you still get an overwhelmingly positive response from pretty much every age group. And not a lot of negative response. Again, this is a US study done last year. So I would argue the Canadian's probably similar. The only group that is a little bit negative on it is 60 plus. And if you look at the 2024, they're the least negative on working from home. And yes, of course, you want to teach people. Yes, people want to be with their colleagues in the workplace. But you know what? You can build up networks outside it. It's just like, if you talk to people who are retired, they have a hard time adjusting, perhaps, after being at the office every day. But often they do build up networks outside of work. Some do, some don't. If you've ever had a maternity leave, you have to build up some kind of network outside of being in the office every day. But, you do it over time. And I would argue younger people who are not necessarily expecting to be in the office every day are probably more skilled at figuring out their lives outside of work than perhaps, I would say, older people, but more traditionally minded people give them credit for. And we'll have to see how that works out for the next generations. People leave jobs if they feel they've plateaued. I mean, that's obvious. But again, something that can be forgotten when we are just dealing with the day-to-day and the cost-cutting part of this. And training is often the thing that's forgotten when the economy slows. Not forgotten, but it's often the thing where budgets get cut. And I really, really hope that will not be the case, because as we know, reskilling and skilling and adapting to change is going to be more important than it ever was. And this economic cycle is not the time to cut back on that. And it also comes out, I mean, again, with the podcast, I've interviewed people who've looked at this in depth, that training, which is really just expressing an interest in the worker and saying, we want you here longer term, is a really strong indicator to people that they're valued and that they should consider being around longer term. And yet, polls the flip side of this. I'm not going to go through all those factors again. All the things that push people out. If you have an employer that makes you feel that you are going to have the opposite of that, you have no voice in your company, but we're going to give you a voice, or you have no flexibility in your work, but we're going to give it to you, they will pull those workers away at great cost to you. And you know what? It's only going to get harder. It really only is, because we are in this very problematic environment in terms of the economics, and it's really a perfect storm. If we were only talking about demographics, and I think 10 years ago we thought that would be the major problem, or 20 years ago maybe, it would be bad enough. But we've got demographics, we're trying to play that off, the AI part of it, we're trying to figure out this economic cycle. I haven't even brought up, that we have I'm trying to find the right word. We have a US administration that's making it more problematic for Canadian companies, okay? And that's not going away anytime soon. So we are going to continuously have to grapple with all of this. The cost pressure part of it will just continue. The generational issues, which you touched on earlier, are only going to get, I think, worse. We had this model where people left the workforce maybe at 60, 65. We have people who are not happy with where their investments are going. They don't want to leave their jobs, right? We have a higher participation rate for the older generation than we've perhaps been used to. We have people coming into the workforce not necessarily where they thought they should. They are maybe on contracts and unhappy with that. They are not getting into the entry-level positions they want to, and that's going to make a difference to their attitude going forward. And very few companies have programs in place around this. Perhaps yours does, but when we talk about things like mentoring programs, and this comes from the OECD, and they're OECD countries, we look at recruiting processes, intergenerational employee resource groups, planned phased retirement programs. Again, I think these were more in vogue some years ago, certainly some of the work arrangements around this. But again, most companies don't necessarily prioritize this. And I would argue with all these generations in the workforce, it's really important to think about it. And then there's TikTok, okay? I won't ask who's on TikTok, okay? But yes, there's lots of ways to judge the pulse of the workforce. I read all kinds of things. I read academic papers. But every so often, I go on work TikTok, and I'm horrified, okay, that there are so many unhappy people. Not that just they're unhappy, but apparently they're able to make videos about how they're unhappy at work. And I don't want to say it's just younger people. Maybe younger people can just use the technology and older people can't. Not sure. And this young woman is probably an extreme version of this. Maybe you saw her last year. She couldn't believe that she had to work a 9 to 5 because by the time she commuted, when was she going to do everything else that was fun and, that would give her a life? I believe she was fired shortly after. So I'm not saying she's the model, and I'm not saying everybody feels like that. But I do think it's an indicator, right, that younger people are questioning work styles and work lives and having a life. And I read it, and I'm like, wow, we didn't dare do that. And lots of people wouldn't dare do that now. But I do think we should maybe think about it, too. Thinking, if you know you can do the work lots of different ways, and if you think maybe you can make a living different ways. I'm not saying she can make a living on Instagram, but some people can. Maybe you ask different questions. And that's something to consider too when you're recruiting people and realizing who your workforce is. We're in an era where we're going to see lots of job shuffling. This comes from the World Economic Forum. And it's so interesting to me that they are looking at job change, how jobs will change in organizations and how the skills required will change. If we were showing something like this even 3 years ago, I think, certainly 5, we'd all expect to see fast food at the top and low-skilled jobs at the top. And now at the top is media and entertainment and government and finance and information technology. Those are the jobs we were told were going to be the more stable. Get an education and you won't be asked to keep figuring it out. And now with AI, it's the exact opposite. So there's a lot to be ready for. We're going to have different team members. If you don't like the look of working with him, ask if you like working with the people you have right now in your workplace. Maybe better or worse. But it's going to add to burnout, and it's going to add to stress. And you are going to be managing people who are being stressed by having this in their organizations. And that's going to probably get worse before it gets better. We're going to need new skills around the green transition, environmental awareness, but also creativity and adaptability, the same things we talked about earlier. And again, we need to bring the people into the organizations that will give us those things. And it's not the easiest thing to do. And your managers are going to be coping with a new ecosystem that is going to be constantly changing. We're going to have different people in different places and different demands, and an economy that's getting worse and worse in many ways. So work is changing. Like households, households don't all look like this anymore, right? We have all kinds of different households. And we also have all kinds of different work. And it's not just different pieces. It's more like a kaleidoscope where the pieces are shifting all the time. And as organizations and as managers, you have to figure that out. You have to deliver customized worker experiences. And I sometimes put that up there and people are like, why would I want to do that? Okay, the workers can adapt. I don't need to deliver anything customized to them. But I think if you want to keep people and people know that they have different needs, maybe that's the framework you should think about. What are you delivering to each individual person? Because that's become the expectation. I'm going to leave it with the same thought I started with. With all that's happening, you are going to need that growth mindset. And I would just ask you if you can learn one and if you can teach one so that your organization has one. And think about what you'd put on your t-shirt. It's very much a journey ahead. We're just at the beginning of it. So we're starting it, and I wish you the best as you go forward into it. Thank you so much.
That was great, Linda. You want to have a seat for her? We have just a few minutes if anyone in the audience has a question they want to ask. I see one right there, but please just wait for the microphone. I see one coming over from. Thanks. That was really good.
Thank you.
No.
There
we go. You were showing the graph and showing how the sort of range of people working, the ages of work have changed, or not changed that much, but the age of the population's increased. If you go back to when pensions were introduced, most of the world, the age was 65. Life expectancy was roughly 65. Now we've got, actually, in a lot of ways, people are retiring younger. If you looked at, there might be some people working longer, but on average, I think they're retiring younger than they were 50 years ago. So we've got people retiring younger and age increasing, healthy age increasing dramatically. Is part of our issue when we look at can we sustain our economy, then we've got to look at, are we expecting to work too short a portion of our healthy lives?
You mean will people have enough money for the rest of their lives?
Effectively, and will the economy have enough people to be able to continue to produce at the level to provide people what they want?
Yeah, I mean, labor force growth is what, 1.3, 1.4 right now. It's pretty low, but I think with technology, I'm not unduly worried about that. I mean, there's a whole other discussion about whether Canada's productivity is high enough and whether we can fix that part of it. In terms of people retiring, I'm also not unduly worried right now because the retirees who want to leave early probably have an asset base, maybe not a pension, but certainly a house, or else they'd still be in the labor force. I'm much more worried about the next generation, like the Gen Xers, who probably don't want to retire because they haven't saved enough or they're not happy enough with their assets. They probably don't have that pension, but might be forced out and will be put into multiple contracts or part-time work or unhappiness or whatever else. I think that'll be something to grapple with, and just maybe it's off topic, but I think our stats right now don't always pick up everything because unemployment rate in different ages looks better than it would be because people are underemployed or they're in contracts and they're not in the stable jobs that would give them the retirement income. So it's a complicated question.
All right, we have time for one more. Someone. Way over here in the corner. Thanks for the gloomy picture of my future.
Oh, sorry. It wasn't personal. It wasn't.
So I'm curious, you talked about the sort of the moral stance of the company and why people are leaving for that reason. And, speaking with candidates all the time, asking them the question when they have a moral objection to their current workplace, you ask if it's been brought up, and they typically say, I've tried. And, speaking with people who are on the hiring side, I'm wondering if you have some advice that you've heard from somebody in your podcast or just around about how a company can properly do a sense check of how their employees feel about the moral of the company. I feel like a SurveyMonkey isn't really doing it anymore. So are there any tips or tricks that you have for people to properly get a sense check of how people feel about the moral stance of the organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it comes down to sometimes individual managers. And that, as I said, that comes out again and again, that managers don't know how to communicate well enough. They don't feel like that they've been taught to do that. But I think if you and also that managers aren't trained at low enough levels. They have to get to like almost, I'm going to be an executive before you get enough investment in them. The younger ones aren't necessarily. But if they were, they would be able to communicate with workers a lot better. And you have to do it maybe organically. As you say, the SurveyMonkey is really not close and personal. Maybe it's better than AI, but it's not as personal as it could be.
Thank you very much, Linda.
Well,
that was
thank you,
great. All right, before we close out the event, I'd like to ask Amina Mattern, Head of Marketing at Indeed Canada, to provide some closing remarks. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the entire team at Indeed, we thank you for being here today, for your energy, and for your thoughtful discussion in the morning. At Indeed, our mission is to connect all, wrong slide. At Indeed, our mission is to connect all people to better work, ultimately to create better lives. By supporting conversations with leaders and experts like today, we continue to strengthen our commitment towards empowering teams, uplifting communities, and driving positive change across our country. Before we close, I'd like to share a brief personal story because I view my role as a tremendous privilege, one that helps shape a workforce of tomorrow that truly places the well-being of our people at the center of everything that we do. Earlier in my career, working in advertising and later in sales, I suffered from a severe burnout. I was left physically and mentally depleted, paralyzed, and exhausted. What I learned then would ultimately become my greatest gift and lesson, which was that I needed to take care of myself so that I could fully show up for others, both at work and at home. This is why I want to close today with a topic that is not only important to us at Indeed, but one that I personally believe is critical to ensure the continued success of our organizations: work well-being. We partnered with Oxford University to understand what truly drives well-being at work. Our study is comprised of 250 million global data points, 2,500 Canadian respondents, and it is the largest study conducted to date on the topic. And what we found was that how people feel at work matters. The bottom line is this: how you support well-being through your programs, through your culture, through your leadership, through your employer brand, ultimately drives your ability to compete for the best talent. But there's good news. Organizations that prioritize well-being see greater financial results and outcomes. Our study shows that companies with strong well-being scores consistently outperform the S&P 500 by 11%. So, as you reflect on today's insights on macroeconomic forces, the impact of AI on workforce disruption, or the need for skills-first hiring, I encourage you to also consider how well-being fits into your organizational strategy. Because how people feel at work is arguably one of the strongest predictors of your long-term retention, performance, and success. I invite you to download our Global Work Wellbeing Report from last year through the QR code on the slide. We will be releasing our 2025 Canadian-specific Work Wellbeing Report at the end of this year. It will include insights and, I would argue more importantly, tools and methodologies that you can then bring back to your organizations to not only implement, but track and measure the progress of your well-being initiatives. We thank you again for being here today and for your commitment to building more people-centered workplaces across Canada. I look forward to continuing the conversation today and in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Amina. I encourage you to all download the report. It is pretty fascinating. There's a lot of neat things in there. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to thank Indeed Canada for sponsoring today's event. I'd also like to thank all the panelists and speakers for their valuable insights, and our audience for listening in and asking such great questions today. We'll be sending out a survey regarding today's events, and we greatly appreciate it if you could take a few moments to complete it. For virtual attendees, a QR code will now be put up, allowing you to complete the survey now. A link to the recorded webcast will be sent to all registered participants within the next 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And for our in-house audience, please join us now for lunch and a working session, or a networking session. Thanks.